This is Creepy and Geeky. Welcome. I'm your host, Robert, and my guest today is no stranger to the show. He's the managing editor of the Daily Grindhouse, the award-winning writer of Our Lady of the Inferno, and his new book, Beasts of 42nd Street, will be released in spring of 2023 by Cemetery Dance. Welcome back to the show, Preston Fassel.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's always a blast coming on, and this is a great way to wind down the year.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah. This is the fourth appearance so far, with plenty more to come. We'll get back on track on our exploitation journey eventually. We keep finding nice little speed bumps to hit along the way, which is always good. Today, though, is our second episode of the Friday the 13th series that I'm doing, and we are focusing on Friday the 13th 3 and Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which, wasn't the final chapter at all. So let's just jump right in. We'll jump right into Friday the 13th, part 3, which when we were talking about this, you were excited to do number 4, and you said you disliked number 3. So I want to totally get your thoughts on why you don't like number 3 so much.
Yeah, it was fun when I initially, balked at doing number 3, but then I thought it's kind of fun because 4 is one of my favorites, 3 is one of my least favorites, and so I've got both ends of the spectrum in a single podcast.
Right.
Um, 3 just feels very slipshod to me, and it feels very rushed. And I know that all of these movies were just desperate cash grabs. And
Oh yeah.
reading Crystal Lake Memories, it really becomes apparent like just how little care went into a lot of these movies, at least in terms of Paramount's investment in them. The
Oh
directors and the
yeah.
cast and the crews, I know, took them all very seriously. But as far as Paramount was concerned, this was just, here's the least amount of money that we can give you to get us a massive return as quickly as possible. And I don't see that with a lot of the movies, but with number 3, I feel like you really see that. It feels like the
Hmm.
first draft of a script. It feels like a very rushed production. Something a friend pointed out to me once, they never actually say the name Jason in the film, except for the opening flashback campfire narration from number 2. And
Interesting.
and the characters in the film itself have no clue what's going on, which is cool in a way, but
Yeah.
it feels very rushed. It feels like something that somebody would have pointed out on a content edit of the script. But watching the movie, I just really get the impression that one, they rushed out a script as quickly as possible, and two, that the script was almost entirely geared around exploiting the very limited 3D technology. And,
Yeah.
this is a horror movie about a like 7 foot tall undead murder monster. And some of the best that you can do is having like what broomsticks coming at the camera in 3D. How much do they really exploit that for any of the horror stuff? Like I remember the eyeball and the spear. And is there really anything else like horror related, or is it just like a bunch of teenagers like thrusting household objects at the camera for an hour and 20 minutes?
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think that I do. So here's my thing. I think that if you're going to use 3D, they utilized it in the way that I like. Is that if you're going to use 3D technology, have stuff coming at my face. I don't like immersive 3D for just to do it. It's if that to me feels super lazy, and that's the reason why a lot of the more recent 3D movies don't do well. Nobody cares. If you're not going to have, because 3D is ultimately a gimmick, and
Yeah.
because you don't go to a 3D movie to watch, the immersiveness. You go for the gimmick, the trick. And so I think that when you do that, you need to have that trick. And as much as, yeah, in this one, it's real lazy. They're just broomsticks and, weird little objects. There's a yo-yo thing. So sure, like it can be kind of fun in that way, but I think that they did it more effectively in something like My Bloody Valentine 3D, where that was more of, the kills and stuff. So something that I've noticed about uh upon rewatch, and I've only rewatched a few of these so far for the series, is that the kills, at least in number three, aren't all that spectacular. They're very like there's nothing very gory about any of them. Most of them happen off screen. A lot of the blood and gore is just very minor for a series that has a reputation for being uh gross and all of these slashers in general. And Friday the 13th being one of the ones you think of when you think of slashers. It's very tame. And number three, in addition, is just super tame in both the kills and any sexuality, anything like that. It doesn't come off very, very well in the end. I do think it's not that bad of a movie. Not as bad as you say it. But but it's not great either for sure. And for a lot of the reasons you mentioned, I think it's interesting though that where Friday the 13th, basically the first 8 movies came out almost once a year during the 80s. Now there's a couple that skipped a year or two, but for the most part, from 80 to 88, we got 8 movies, and so it went rapid fast. They were just like pumping these out,
Mhm.
and it reminds me of another horror series that did very much the same, and that was Saw. And whereas Saw actually managed to, depending on the person, because there's a lot of people who will quibble on this, I think they were more successful in keeping the storyline on track, especially for a series that made it up as they went along. Because as far as I understand it, Saw really didn't think. I mean, I'm sure B1L and them had sort of ideas and stuff to continue the storyline, but they just kind of went, okay, well, now we got to fast track a sequel. Let's pump it out, pump it out, pump it out. And they did that year after year after year for several years. And I think they were more successful in it than what Friday the 13th did, because Friday the 13th, every movie would just like was connected at least up through 6, and then but each one still felt like their own thing because they didn't try to hold too much continuity with them. So
No, because Paramount was for some reason allergic to bringing back the same people to work on these
yeah,
movies.
yeah,
There was a literal revolving door of writers and directors who, oftentimes had no prior knowledge or experience of the series. A couple of years ago, I got to interview the writer of number four, Barney Cohen. I suck with names. You know this by this point. But they hired him to write this thing, and he didn't even know what Friday the 13th was at the time.
oh
And
jeez,
he and his wife had to like run down a theater that was showing the movies because they didn't have a VHS player at the time, if I recall correctly, and they had to go and find a movie theater that was showing the previous 3 movies and go watch them after he'd been hired to write number 4.
wow,
Uh, and I mean, Paramount, just for whatever reason, did not want to bring the same people back. So you had all these different creators, having to put their own spin on it, which is theoretically cool. But again, like you pointed out, this was not an opportunity for somebody to sit down and think, what am I going to bring to this
yeah,
franchise? It was, how am I going to get this done on time and under budget because we're on a time crunch to, churn it out for, whatever time of year. And I think that's really why you see such inconsistency in the storytelling and in the characterization. I wrote an article several years ago for Fangoria called the unifying theory of Jason Voorhees, which was an attempt to pull together all of the disparate plot threads and try and make sense of this thing in universe and like keeping each piece of canon. But it's just a mess. And then Saw, at least you had the same people working on it. So at least
Yeah.
they knew these characters, they knew this world, they had an idea of, what they were working with.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find that it's interesting though that even within this number three is the only time you actually had a director follow up his own previous work because Steve Miner did number two as well. So that's what's so weird about it is that at least with two and three they kind of feel sort of connected. Especially with the lead in that was the end of number two. It's just there's just still so much that's disconnected, and you would think that they would be more connected. And that's just what's funny about this series in general. Like I said, up until number six, there's a continuity there, but it's very loose. And they don't really try to hold much to it.
Even down to so radically changing the way that Jason looks. To I always forget that Steve Miner did number three because to me they feel and even look so different. Number two really feels part and parcel with number one, and it really feels like this almost exploitation Deliverance style backwoods
Yeah,
horror movie. And the one thing I do have to give number three is that I feel like number three is where the more independent tone of the Friday the 13th franchise, as we know it, starts to develop. And it feels at least more like the movies that followed, whereas one and two feel much more rooted in kind of 70s exploitation filmmaking.
yeah,
But just Jason looks so different and just there's just this different weird feel to me with number three. And going back to something that you said before too, three is one of the entries in the franchise I've done the least behind the scenes reading about, just because it's not one that I have a lot of interest in. But I
right.
even think that there was some meddling on Paramount's part. I think that there is, or at least was, more graphic gore footage that was shot for the movie that ended up getting excised. Because I do know for a fact that in the original screenplay, the plan was to make Jason a serial rapist.
Oh
And
wow.
when she's attacked in the woods in the
Yeah,
flashback, yeah, that was meant to be more overtly sexual. And when
interesting.
Paramount realized that this was going to be this ongoing cash cow and that they weren't going to end the franchise with this, because originally three was supposed to be the final film. And they were going to wrap it up as a trilogy, and this was going to be the end of Jason. And when they realized, well, no, we can milk another movie out of
Yeah,
this. Well, you cannot build a horror franchise on the back of a serial rapist and still sell merchandise. And so that
right.
got snipped out along, I believe, with some gore footage in order to secure a definite middle soft R rating.
Yeah. I think it's interesting too because you can tell by the way even with this edit, you can tell that it well, not tell, but I it feels like it's an ending. It feels like they're like, okay, well, he's dead at the end of this one for sure. They go off and they don't really leave it open ended. And so it's interesting that they kind of did that. And that's what's funny about and I don't want to get in number four yet too much, but that's what with number four, where they do call that the final chapter. It's like it's a weird that they were like trying to close this off at least with these next two, with three and four, they tried to close it off with each installment. And it's like, but Jason didn't want to be contained, and he was like, no, we're gonna keep going, and these movies were so popular, they were just like, okay, well, I guess we got to keep doing it. And I mean, number three is where we get the hockey mask for the first time. So it's like you now have this iconic image for this character, and you didn't think it was going to be successful after that. Like you made this like better than it was supposed to be, like, or better than it should have been anyway.
So the
Given
hockey,
the
oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, so the hockey mask was something that happened on set. The script just had like this very loose specification that Jason like disguises himself.
Right.
And somebody on set had a Detroit Red Wings hockey mask that they had in their own sports equipment because they were an amateur hockey player. And there are now so many different origin stories for who can like claim to be like the person responsible for the mask. And
Right.
like this has gotten into some very ugly online wars over the
Oh yeah.
past 15, 20 years of all these
Everybody wants to take
people.
credit.
Everybody wants to take credit for it, but I don't think Paramount anticipated that. And like
Yeah.
due to this on-set happy accidents, they end up with this. And I just bet you that when they saw that image on screen, like you're saying, this iconic image of
Yeah.
Jason in the hockey mask, either in Rush's dailies when the Paramount executives sat down and watched the final product, that's when they realized, oh shit, we got to make another one.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's the funny thing too, because he spends more than half the movie, I'd say two-thirds of the movie, unmasked, and you don't really get a good look at his face either the entire time. It's, you see it kind of from the distance or whatever, you obscured and everything. And so, you don't even get this moment until way close to the end of the movie. And then, he's got it on. And he just comes out. It's not like he put it on or anything like that. There was no ceremonial putting on. He just comes out and it's just boom, Jason, and then it's like from that point on, it's the Jason we know and love. And that's what's funny about like 1 and 2 is like, number one, of course, it's Pamela, everybody, anybody who doesn't watch the Friday the 13th series always gets that mixed up. Oh, it's always been Jason. It's the great line in the first Scream movie, and it's it's just funny that like you said, these first two, 1 and 2, felt like more like exploitation, more definitely not in tone with what came afterward. 3 really sets the tone. As much as it's not a great movie, it sets the tone for everything that's going to come afterward.
Yes.
And I think it really is 3 and 4 kind of set that tone. They both kind of go hand in hand with that. It's although 4 sets up the whole Tommy Jarvis trilogy from that point. So, which is kind of a whole nother mixed bag. But yeah, it's 3 is interesting because, like you said, it's not a great movie, but I think that a large part of that is, like you said, rushing to get it out, and 2, also trying to make it 3D, trying to capitalize on that 3D stuff. So they're making a lot of like bad choices in filmmaking,
Yeah.
and to make like these, like you said, these stupid 3D things, sticking a broomstick in your face or whatever, all these random weird shit to use the technology where may have been other opportunities to move the narrative forward. And it's just unfortunate that because they did that, there's some good moments, don't get me wrong. Like you said, the harpoon to the eye, that's a great moment. I always think that it's a funny moment more than anything else, but Jason gets stuck in the leg with a knife, and then he pulls it out and throws it at the girl, and it's just so great because it's so, they obviously had it on a line. You can actually see in, on the Blu-ray, because you got good quality now, you can see the like the fishing line that it was connected to, so it hit the door just perfect. It's
Never caught
goofy as
that.
all hell. I love that kind of stuff. And then like I think this is the one where the eyeball gets popped out too, or he squishes the guy's head and the eyeball pops out.
Yes.
Yeah, it's there's some great moments, some good gore moments in this, for also being so tame on the gore. So
I do have to say, in terms of moments, as much as I dislike the movie overall, this is
yeah.
one of my favorite final girl sequences in a Friday the 13th movie.
Yeah.
Once it's just Jason and Chris at the end, that's where the life comes to the movie. And it's just
Yeah.
fantastic. And I loved seeing her, really fight back against Jason. And it's almost equally matched. And I love getting to see Jason actually like get taken down a couple of times. And I
Right.
think this is one of the only entries in the series where we actually hear him make verbalizations while
Yeah.
he's getting like knocked around.
And he's running a lot too, it's
Yes.
you and this is what I've got to say too, that two through four, because these are the two through four with Jason, that these are, you said undead Jason, but undead Jason doesn't come until six. So this is still, although we can quibble about that, because whether or not he's undead at this point or not, but he seems more human in these first in two through four. Sure, he's powerful, he's big, he's he seems unstoppable, but he does get taken down a few times. He does get hurt quite a few times, in ways that he just doesn't after six. After six,
Hmm.
when he's brought back to life, he's definitely undead monster Jason. And I think that's an interesting distinction to make, that these early ones, he's still, sure, he's still monster Jason, but he's hurtable. He's able to feel pain, and he's moving a lot different than he does later on. And that could be, again, due to different actors and how they want to set Jason up. But I do think it's fun to see these two eras of Jason.
Yeah, you can really see them like starting in that direction, beginning here with three.
Yeah,
Because in two, he just looks straight up human. Even when they pull the bag off of his head, he's just like the stereotypical image of like the disfigured backwoods hillbilly.
yeah,
But he's still, he's played by an average sized guy. The guy playing him is like 5'10, 5'11. He's got an average build. Now here in three, now he's like giant,
yeah. He's
and
bigger.
he's
Yeah,
completely bald, and the makeup looks very goblin-y when we do get to see his
yeah,
face at the end. And then
yeah.
we'll get to it in number four, but in number four, they take that even further. And
Oh
so you
yeah,
can really start to see the seeds here of moving away from the idea of a perfectly human killer into something overtly supernatural that we'll get, completely into later.
yeah, yeah. No, definitely, yeah. And I think that's what's great about the series, is that as much as each movie feels of its own piece, that there is definitely that continuity that flows between them to give you some kind of sense of narrative, connective tissue between them all. So um I just, yeah, I would say overall, most of the characters in this movie, like most of the regular, the kid characters or whatever, they're not they're not super interesting. I do agree with you that Chris is a great final girl. That the fight at the end is very good. But yeah, most of the other ones, you're just kind of like, whatever.
That's a big issue for me because some of the ones directly before and after actually have really great characterization for a
Yeah,
slasher film, especially. And Ginny in number two is such this well-rounded, well-realized character. A couple of the other campers actually get some backstories and some characterization. Number
yeah.
four, I think, has really excellent characterization.
Oh
And then
yeah,
smack in the middle of those, number three here, it's like, why are these people even friends? Like, why are these like
yeah,
20 somethings like friends with like this old burned out hippie couple? And like, do
yeah,
they go to school together? Did they go to school together? Are they college students now? It's like, who the fuck are
yeah.
these people?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's definitely, I think it's funny too, because three and four have this interesting, they both have a character in both of them that is connected to horror and horror filmmaking in ways, because we've got Shelley in number three, that's got, that's doing all the gags and everything to be like a killer from horror movies. And then you've got Tommy, who makes, very like well done masks for somebody his age. Like he's doing like expert level masks, which is crazy. So it's funny that it's almost in a way giving this meta vibe to the whole proceeding that kind of informs things in horror later on, especially through Wes Craven's work. So it's interesting to see that. And I know that uh, um, Cunningham, who directed the first Friday the 13th movie and produced a lot of these later ones, his company did, that him and Wes Craven were friends and started out together. So it's interesting it's so interesting to see the connective tissue between not only these different horror franchises but the directors and stuff. It's great to see all of that and to get that to inform the stuff that comes out during this decade, especially.
Yeah, it's really wild. You know, you bring up they were friends, they knew one another, they worked together on Last House on the Left.
Yeah.
And in this really weird way, Last House on the Left kind of like laid the groundwork for 80s horror.
Hmm. Yeah, and especially thinking about, like you said, with the exploitation aspect of the first two Friday the 13th movies, that kind of led right into that, especially for Cunningham. um, so yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I do. Yeah, the going back to the characters though, yeah, Shelley's an interesting character. I do think that he's one of the only standouts in number three. So it's good to see that, especially because he's become a lawyer. The actor
Yes.
has become a lawyer, and he's actually been helping people understand what has been happening with the whole Friday the 13th litigation stuff that's been going on, and why it's been so bogged down in and why we haven't gotten any Friday the 13th stuff in a long time. So it's been nice.
I know it's a surreal thing to like see this guy, you know, in a movie
Yeah,
from 40 some years ago and then pop on Twitter and here he is in a suit and tie talking about copyright law. It's
yeah.
fantastic.
No, it's great. And it's definitely helped me out because like I've always been like, what the hell? Why aren't we getting any more Friday the 13th stuff? And he breaks it down nice and easy for those of us who aren't steeped in the law. So it's been nice. But let's jump into number four, which obviously is one of
Yes.
your favorites. um I like it. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorites. I do like it. It's probably higher up there for me than a lot of the other ones, um in terms of the series, because like you said, it's got a lot of great characters in it. Most of the I guess young adult characters that move in next door. I wouldn't call them teenagers. We always call them teenagers, but most of these people were young adults. But they move in next door. It's I guess I'm confused as to the location. I mean, it was this supposed to be around Crystal Lake? I was confused as to the what locale this was. I'm
Yeah,
assuming it was supposed to be around Crystal Lake.
yeah, I think they're still around Crystal Lake because I think the idea is that like Jason is like tied to the lake and he's like returning
Right.
to his territory. Something interesting that Tom McLaughlin, who did number six, said was that he conceptualized Jason like a coyote who's compelled to return to its territory regardless of any of the changes that happen there. Apparently, coyotes are one of the few animals that will not be driven away by urbanization or
Hmm.
industrialization. They'll stay in that territory. And thinking back about that, I remember my family and I lived in a relatively new neighborhood when I was in high school in Oklahoma, and we did have problems with coyotes.
Yeah.
That makes sense in retrospect now. So I do think that's just meant to be like another region around Crystal Lake, because I think that Crystal Lake is meant to be somewhere like in or near the Pine Barrens in New Jersey, and so it's like this
Oh,
vast
interesting.
expanse of
That makes
woodland.
sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I know the Pine Barrens is supposed to be dense, so that makes a lot of sense.
I flew,
Yeah.
yeah, I flew
Go.
flew over it, or I was just gonna say I flew over it earlier this year, and it like really like drove home just how dense and
Yeah.
how big they really are.
Yeah, from what I understand, there's like areas of that of the Pine Barrens that humans have not touched, even that it's just so densely forested that it's just not possible to get through it. So, and why people get lost and killed in there. So,
Yeah, they even
um,
got their own.
oh no, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say they got like their own kind of Sawney Bean legend about there's supposedly
Yeah,
like killer rednecks living out there in the
yeah,
Pine Barrens.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's interesting what you say about that, about the about a creature keeping to his home ground and everything like that, especially because in this one we got a guy coming in who's definitely hunting Jason, much to his own dismay. Uh yeah, don't hunt
He's
Jason, man. It's
killing
not gonna end.
me.
Yeah, yeah. Oh my god. Okay, so it's been a while since I watched these movies. That part was so dumb. It was just like, run, Trish, run. He's killing me. It was like, dude, you're not going to be screaming that if you're getting killed. Come on. So,
And the,
uh,
the idea behind it too is like really disturbing and just pulled off really poorly. The
Yeah.
screenwriter had heard this story or read the story in the newspaper about this guy who'd gotten mugged in New York and gotten stabbed to death, and was like audibly begging the guy to stop stabbing him. And like this
Oh
guy
wow.
got killed in this mugging, begging his murderer to please stop. And like the idea was there was going to be this very like psychologically disturbing death scene with this guy begging for his life as Jason kills him. And then
It did not
this
work.
guy, no, between the direction and the guy pitching it to 11, it's just, I've seen
Yeah.
this with a crowd a couple of times, and that never fails to get the audience just like busting out laughing.
Oh, I'm sure. Oh my God. Yeah, and overall I'd say this movie's generally pretty good on the kills are pretty tame. I think they're even tamer in this one than they were in number 3. Um there there's some good moments, but I think, well, no, am I no. This actually has the good stuff. Um there's some, with the guy up, like, you know, um uh kind of uh, crucified to the door and everything. There's actually some decent stuff in this. I was mistaking this one uh for later stuff. But yeah, no, 3 and 4, I mean, three's, you know, not super great, but it's got some good moments. Whereas 4 has some good gnarly moments, like Crispin Glover, man, gets that knife to
Yes.
the face. Oh my God. That was a good scene. Um, but yeah, no, and then, like we said, the adults in this, they all get a little bit more well-rounded characters. You get to know them a little bit more. So you get to, you know, care about them a little bit more. That was part of the problem with number 3, is number 3, I just didn't care about anybody. Like, if you can't care about the characters, then you don't care about them. Like, you don't care about their deaths. And this one was definitely better with that. Still a little surface here and there, but I mean, overall you got much better. And then, of course, we get the introduction of Tommy Jarvis, who will play a much larger role in the series overall. So uh, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I love about this is it feels like you start out watching a John Hughes movie, and then
Yeah.
all of a sudden somebody shows up and starts killing everyone. And
Yeah.
that's just such a great idea. And I feel like it's pulled off really well. And like if you snipped out the beginning of this movie and you snipped out that scene of Jason killing the hitchhiker who's obviously just in there to add another body to it,
Yeah.
so much of the early part of this feels like a John Hughes movie. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of attention paid to the relationship between Trish and her mother. And
Yeah.
there's this one shot in the movie that I've always loved, and it's such a smart moment and a smarter moment than you would expect from a Friday the 13th movie, of her watching Trish go off to meet these other kids who are renting the house next door. And she's been talking about how she's single, and apparently she and her husband have just gone through a divorce, or they're separated. And there's just this look on her face where you can just like tell there's all of this regret going on, and she's
Yeah.
thinking back on her own adolescence. And so much goes through her mind on that actress's face in just that one moment. And that is
Yeah.
so much more in the way of very subtle characterization than a lot of the other Friday the 13th movies, a lot of horror movies in general would give. And it's all these thoughtful little touches that accumulate for me to make this a higher caliber Friday the 13th and a higher caliber slasher than a lot of the other movies that were made during this
Mhm.
era.
Oh yeah. Yeah, especially, you're getting from, number 1, of course, is a classic. Number 2, is a good continuation of that. And like we said, they're of a of a of a of a set, and then 3 kind of derails a little bit, but kind of lays some groundwork for the stuff that's to come. And I think that's what's most important about number 3. As much as it feels kind of bleh, there's still those moments that kind of inform where the series is going to go from there, to a degree, at least for number 4, because number 5 takes a wild swing outside of the box, and then and number 6 on becomes almost doesn't really care about continuity at that point. Number six on just goes, you know what, we're going to just tell a different story each time with Jason, put him into a different story and see what happens, you know. And to be fair, that's not a bad idea. It doesn't work successfully every moment, but I think that it works more often than not. At least for me. Um, I think the latter half tends to um, work better for me than it does the first half, because the first half seems to be wildly inconsistent. But they're trying to make it consistent, whereas at least from six on, they're like, yeah, we don't care about consistency. We're just going to throw Jason into a new experience each time and see what happens, and you know, we'll just have fun with it.
Oh yeah, I
But
love 6, 7, and 8.
oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Nine, but you know, and 10 has its charms. So um I do I so you know I think that nine, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because I want to get into it with the person I'm talking to, but nine is fun, um, just because the director tried to connect it to the Evil Dead series, and that's the only reason why I like it at all. Like, is just because of that, and beyond that, I don't care. He didn't do it good, but he tried. So, but anyway, back to number four. Yeah, no, I think it's fun. I think that it's the this group of teens, like I'm glad they took it out of the summer camp aspect of it. Like they just said, you know, we're not doing summer camp, but we'll have these guys all come together. They'll just be in a random house together, and you know, they're just there for a party or whatever. It was kind of, you know, they were supposed to be there for a party, but it seemed like, you know, the Trish and her mom and them thought they were going to be like renting it for longer or something. I don't know. That's what it seemed like to me by the context of their conversation. But it only seemed like these guys were only going to be there for, you know, maybe a weekend or something, and maybe that's what they meant by renting it. I don't know. So, but you know, it does it's a lot more fun. The kills are really great. I like the you know, some of them are just whatever, but I like that, you know, at the moment that the one girl, I can't remember her name now, Sarah, yeah, I think it's Sarah, she goes running around the house trying to get away from Jason, and every door she opens up there's another dead body, and I like that Jason took the time to like block all her ways out by with putting dead bodies just to like scare the crap out of her. And you know, that was like, you know, that just shows like, you know, again, this goes into how Jason is different in these early ones than he is later. You know, he's running, he's doing stuff, he's thinking. You know, at one point he's pulling the phone boxes off. He's you know, killing the electricity. You know, he's doing all these things to terrorize. It's not even just straight out killing like he does later on. It's actually terrorizing them. And I think that's interesting that that's the version of Jason that we get is more of a thoughtful killer in a lot of ways too, that you don't really see later on.
He's a much more malign presence in the early
Yeah.
ones, and a much more kind of actively malevolent and evil character versus later on being much more of a kind of animalistic monster. And it's interesting to see what different takes different writers had on him in these early runs before six kind of more firmly establishes, okay, he is like this giant zombie killer monster, you know, have fun with it,
Right.
go with it. And then these early ones, you can see they're still trying to figure it out. They're still pulling from Halloween a little bits in terms of
Yeah.
like the posing and the ritual with the bodies. But it's an excellent point. He is like this very like actively malevolent force in this one. And for me, I think this is the last time that Jason was actually scary. And you
Yeah.
know, number five, of course, you know, it's randos, and then in number six, it's where he really becomes a fun character, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you know, something completely removed from the realm of the real. But in number four, he's actually a scary character.
And I think that's what makes four the more popular also for a lot of people, is that, you know, it is scary. It's much like we've said, he's much more malevolent, he's much more thoughtful in what he's doing. And it's like you said, it kind of throws back to the Halloween vibe, and just slashers in general that are doing that. And I think that's good, don't get me wrong, but I do like that that's what they ended up kind of jettisoning later on and just going, we're going to have what Jason became, which is the giant monster guy who's unstoppable, and and created the icon that he really became. Because I really do think, like, as much as he was already an icon at this point, I think 6 and beyond is what really launched him, especially 6 through 8, what really launched him into the huge cultural zeitgeist of everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's it's those first movies, or those first 4 movies, are all great in their own ways and everything, but really it's that latter, and just 6 through 8, because 9 and 10 were just whatever, and then but then we got Freddy and Jason, so that's my favorite. So, or one of my favorites. So, but yeah, I think 4 is really good for that way of kind of, and I do think it's really weird that they were going to end it with number 4. Like, you've already gone through 1, 2, and 3. You already know he's like great, and I think it was probably just Paramount probably just going, well, what are we going to do with him now? We can't keep spinning our wheels doing the same story over and over and over again. So I think that's probably where they were just like, oh, let's just end it.
I feel like there was this pull for them where they didn't want to be associated with something so grimy. With as extreme as horror is today, it's weird to like think back to the 80s and consider that like this was stuff that mainstream audiences had not seen before, and that this was considered like just really nasty and like really
Yeah.
like spiritually bankrupt, and that like
And I think it's
the
so funny
worst
because
thing.
it's so not compared to what we have today.
I know. I like remember seeing on TV when I was a kid, like this Christian cartoon where this kid wants to go see what's basically supposed to be Friday the 13th, and like the lesson of the episode is that it's going to like scar this kid for life and like corrupt him on like this core spiritual level, and like that's what people really thought at the time.
Yeah.
And I think that Paramount was trying to navigate between these movies making them all the money in the world, and then the kind of reputation that these movies had, and like, do we want to be associated with this? Was it either Siskel or Ebert like doxed Betsy Palmer over
Yeah.
having been in these movies? Like,
That
that's
was
just how,
messed up.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I really think it's like, okay, we did this, we made our money off of it. Let's walk away from the table while we still have the sterling reputation of Paramount Pictures. Oh, wait, it made $25 million. Okay, maybe one more. The next one will be the last one, but we are
Yeah.
Paramount Pictures. We are decent people. We don't want the negative publicity. Oh, it made $50 million. Well, okay, just what and I really think
Yeah.
that's what it was. And it's
Oh
like,
yeah.
yeah,
They
they
couldn't
did, they
leave the
did
money on the table like that. They were
no.
just like, especially for a major like Paramount, it didn't make any sense to them because, they were putting very little money into these movies, and then they were getting so much back out of it. Like, they were the only major that was really doing this. A lot
Hmm.
of the other stuff at the time was coming out through independent labels and stuff. So, having, you know, Paramount be the big daddy of Friday the 13th was like, and I'm sure it looked really bad in the public eye for them. They're like, they were getting lots of bad publicity about it, but at the same time they're making so much money from it. They're like, eh, but what can we do? And I think that's what, kind of fucked number 5. Because, and I talk about this on another episode, but number 5 was so sanitized, in a way. Wait, was it 5? 6? No,
I,
5 was actually really, really like
five
raunchy.
was five
But
was made by a
okay,
pornographer.
so, but that's the interesting thing about that was number 5 had all the nudity in it, but the kills were super sanitized. So they were okay with all the nudity, but all the kills were very pulled back. They Paramount actually went back in and re-edited his stuff to pull out a lot of the sex and a lot of the violence and stuff. They kept in quite a lot of it. It's one of the ones that has the most nudity in it, but they really sanitized a lot of 5 and 6 have a lot of really tame kills. So it's interesting that they continued along that line, but we're like, okay, but we're gonna pull way back on this stuff. They still did well. So and that's why they kept making them. So it's really funny to see this weird through line of like that they kept trying to stop this series, but just like Jason, it wouldn't stay dead. So and
There
that's the frustrating thing now is that somebody finally killed him and we haven't gotten a movie in over a decade. So
there was actually a point where they were considering hiring Ingmar Bergman or one other art house director. I can't remember the other one, but they were very seriously considering like hiring Ingmar Bergman to like basically class this thing up. And it's like, it's
God.
not like dirty and dark anymore. It's Ingmar Bergman brings you Friday the 13th. Uh I always
I don't
wonder what that would have looked like.
yeah. Like it'd be interesting. Like I that's bizarre though. Like I don't think you could art house up Jason in any way like that would make any kind of sense. Like he's just he's got to be that dirty grimy character. It's like how do you try to class that up? Oh man, that's funny. Just make your own stuff, Ingmar, which is what he did. So yeah, no, I think four is really fun. It's got lots of good moments, and Crispin Glover's dance in that is one of the highlights of the series. Everybody likes to point out to. It's Crispin Glover being Crispin Glover. But there's so much in there. It's actually really like for story wise and stuff. It's not for pushing Jason's story forward, but just actually delving into the characters that are around it. Like we said before with the other one, you didn't get much, but in this one we got a lot more. Not like a ton, but you could feel more for these deaths than you could for the last movie. And so I think that's more interesting, especially the Jarvis family. So
And this one really focuses on the idea of what if this were real. I feel like this
yeah,
really takes place more so than a lot of the other movies in the real world. There's another moment, and I think it's probably my favorite moment in the Friday the 13th series, and one of my favorite moments in all of slasherdom. And it's near the very beginning, and they're bringing in Jason's body, and they've ostensibly been bringing in bodies of the victims from the previous film.
yeah,
And there's this almost blink and you miss it scene where the camera lingers on this family crying in the waiting room. And the implication is that it's the family of one of the people from the previous film who
mm,
just found out that one of their relatives has been killed by Jason. And you get this actual moment of like human grief and the idea
yeah,
that all those people that you saw die in number two and three had families and had lives that they're not going back to because of Jason. And it's just this really powerful moment for
yeah.
what is ostensibly like this wacky over the top slasher film. It's another reason I just really love this one and the thought that went into it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so small things too that you blink and you miss it kind of moments in this one that it's I think that's what makes this one one of the most popular entries in it. I as much as I like Corey Feldman, I'm not a big fan of the Tommy Jarvis character in general. I think and for something that gets pushed into the next two entries, he's it's a very thin character in this one. He
Yeah.
doesn't get a lot of play. I mean, he's not bad or anything, and I actually like Corey Feldman as an actor, especially during this era, during the '80s and stuff. So it's interesting to see him. Um, a lot of people who enjoy this and enjoy it as part of the Tommy Jarvis trilogy. So,
Yeah, I see what they were trying to do. I get the idea
yeah,
that, they wanted to give Jason this nemesis. And, it started out as this idea. I know that he's named Tommy and he makes the mask because it was supposed to be like this like love letter to Tom Savini.
Tom Savini. Yeah,
Uh, but I don't think they realized at the time, like, hey, this kid who's supposed to be like this nod to Tom Savini is going to go on to carry two more films in this franchise. And it's
yeah,
like, well, what do we do with him beyond that? And
yeah.
there's not a lot of consistency with this character between
No.
the entries in the series. And, for him to be like this borderline psycho in number five, he
Yeah.
rapidly snaps back hard to, this like scrappy can-do kid in number
Yeah.
six. And like you point out here, we get very little idea of a personality or sense of
Yeah.
who this kid is beyond he is good at masks and science.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's what's interesting too is like, in this one we get him that he's like, he's the member of the family who's mechanically and scientifically inclined. He fixes the car and he knows what's going on. And his sister's like, "Oh, go get the power turned back on and everything." And it's like, this kid's what, 10? So it's like it's such a weird thing for like, I guess he was supposed to be 12. So he's supposed to be but it's like, okay, when I was 12, I didn't know shit. And I grew up in the 80s. And so, I mean, but that says more about me than it does about about growing up in the 80s. But yeah, he's other than like, that he likes masks and monster stuff and everything. I did think it was weird though too, because then he's like, okay, well, I'm gonna shave my head and everything. I was like, you got a mask right upstairs that looks kind of like Jason. Why didn't you just put that on? So
As
it was
much
a
as I,
weird
yeah,
choice.
as much as I love this movie, I've still never quite gotten what the point of that is. It's like,
Yeah,
what do you think you're going to like? What's going on in your mind? What do you
yeah,
think it accomplishes to like dress up like this guy? And I think I'm trying to remember who it was. It was a cracked writer, and they had this really funny like assessment of this scene, and they're like, "What's going through Jason's mind at this point?" It's like, "Are you me? Am I
yeah.
me?" And it's like, how did you think that was going to work? I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah, it's like your little cosplay version of me. What is this supposed to be? So yeah, I didn't quite get. And to be fair, I mean, he's 12 years old. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. So I mean,
Yeah.
that kind of makes sense in that way. So you're just like, oh, I'm gonna try something that'll like confuse Jason. And I think that almost was a continuation of what she did in number two, where she dressed up like her mom. So I think that was kind of like the filmmakers thinking is like, rather than dress as the mom, I'll have the boy turn into Jason, and that will be, the weird moment or whatever like that. But again, we get him this, we get this death of Jason, and this is finally the death of Jason. These last two movies, you kind of got fake out, and but this was really the death. And I think that it was a ballsy move. They actually were going to go out with this movie, despite kind of teasing by having Tommy at the end be like, "Whoa, we're gonna have him look in the camera and be all evil looking and everything." But it's just like, okay, you tried. Nobody wanted Tommy Jarvis as the killer. Come on, we all want Jason back. But yeah, I thought it was a ballsy move to like go out on a we're gonna kill off Jason and try to end the series here. One of the most popular franchises of the 80s at that point. And in,
Hmm.
in terms of things, I mean, it was like you know one of the only franchises going on. So I mean, it's like to kill something that's a cash cow like that, just seeing and like we talked about, just Paramount being skittish probably more than anything. So it's just funny to like look back on it now. And we're what, 12 movies deep into this series at this point. And obviously they were smart enough to keep it going after that. They saw the money laying on the table, and it goes back to what we were talking about with Saw. If you've got, and a lot of franchises will do this too. Like if Scream did it, like literally the next year they brought out Scream 2. They fast tracked a sequel on that. So it's smart, but it's always weird to sit there and go, I'm not going to do anymore. So especially if you're gonna leave it in such a weird spot. So I don't know, but I think it's a good series overall. Like Friday the 13th for me, as weirdly inconsistent as it is, and it has its definite ups and downs. I think overall Friday the 13th is one of my favorite slasher franchises. One of my favorite horror franchises in general. I mean, obviously I got the cool poster back here. Uh, so yeah, I got the big box set that Scream Factory put out because it's a great set.
I had already bought all of the movies standalone on DVD, and all but one of two of them, no, all but one of them, I had autographed by the Jason from that movie.
Oh wow.
I've got the autograph on number one of the kid from the lake. I've got dashes on number two. The only one I didn't get was number three because he had already died by the time
Oh
I
wow.
embarked on this quest. But one through eight, I've all got autographed by those movies, Jasons. And then
That's
Scream
crazy.
Factory brings the set out. And it's like, I can't justify this. I can't.
Well, see, okay. So I only got into like heavy horror back in like 2018 or so, like that. I like horror and stuff, but it was more casual. So then I got heavy into it and was just like, okay, I'm gonna start playing everything. So they didn't have a set like this. Well, they did. Scream Factory had put out like a box set a few years before I got into it, and it was like a good Blu-ray box set and everything. I was like, okay, that's cool, but I couldn't get it because it was already priced way because it was out of print. It was already priced way out of my range. And so what I did was I bought the 1 through 8 on Blu-ray, and then had to grab the DVDs of 9 and 10. And I bought those like through eBay. It was a cheap deal to get 9 and 10 on DVD, which sucked because I don't really deal with DVD if I don't have to. I try to just do Blu-ray and higher. And then of course I got, it was a 3-pack of Freddy versus Jason, the reboot, and I think the Nightmare reboot. Um and so I had gotten them all. I'd finally gotten them all in those separate pieces, and then Scream Factory goes, hey, guess what, we're gonna put out a really cool box set. And I'm like, I gotta get this thing. So, and of course I had to, because I'm a big fan of the artist who did the box and the poster and stuff.
Yes.
So I was just like, I have to get this. I have to have that poster. So yeah, and it's a good set. It's a really good set. So, but I understand you not wanting to not wanting to get it. But if you ever do, it goes on sale quite often.
Nice.
So, so. All right. Any last thoughts about 3 or 4 that we didn't go over?
No, I think that four I could just go on about. I ran down the original uh script, shooting
Oh yeah.
script for Barney Cohen was nice enough to send me a digitized copy he had of it after I interviewed him. And I'm still like pouring my way through that to see what got tweaked and changed and like what
Yeah.
got mentioned in there. Like the house that the kids rent next door was purpose built for that movie
Oh,
and
okay.
is like described in the script. And like he had this cool idea that he wanted it to be decorated like it belonged to somebody who had maybe died. And
Hmm.
like he called it the dead house. And he like wanted these kids to like go like almost back in time to like this estranged environment that belongs to somebody who was like no longer in the world, to create this like uncanny effect. Just so much thought, just so much thought. The other funny thing is that originally Crispin Glover was meant to be dancing to jug band music. The writer had really gotten into, what was it called, like Kurskin something Kurskin or Kurskin something, and they were like a jug band, and he wanted character to be really obsessed with this jug band, just as a funny joke that like this 20-year-old kid would be into jug music, and Crispin Glover was supposed to dance to that, and that ended up getting excised. But I just you got to stop me because I could just keep talking about number four.
That's awesome. That's hilarious though. I like that. No, that's very cool. Yeah. Yeah, no, this is um it's a fun movie. I think number 3 is fun too. It has its moments. Like I said, it sets up a lot of a lot of iconic stuff that continues throughout you know the rest of the series in general, but especially these next couple. And that it's just, I don't know. It's Friday the 13th will always be something that'll just be fun, regardless of good or bad or whatever. They're just fun, like we said, with especially with getting off of the trying to get away from the continuity. I think that it becomes a lot better for a while. So, and we'll see. Hopefully they can get back to it. Like, I would really like that. Well, here's the thing, they did announce recently that Brian Fuller is doing a Friday the 13th series. So I'm interested and cautiously optimistic about that, especially because they apparently have the rights to do pretty much to pick and choose from everything from the entire series. So they can kind of do like each movie a season. So
Yeah.
you don't look so enthused with that.
It was great for Hannibal. Brian Fuller has a very particular sensibility that
Yeah.
I don't think is right for every adaptation. He has a very
No, true.
strong, very strong authorial voice that I don't personally feel is suited to the Friday the 13th series,
Okay.
and I'm afraid that we're going to lose some of the pith and essence of Friday the 13th
Mm,
at the expense of what he would like it to be. Uh, I'll watch it. I'm curious. I
yeah.
want to see. I loved Hannibal. I mean, I feel like he was the perfect person to breathe lifeblood into Hannibal and the Hannibal Lecter verse.
Right.
As for Friday the 13th, though, well, we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm interested. I'm cautiously optimistic as well. I've never seen Hannibal. I'm not a big enough fan of Hannibal Lecter stuff to like really jump into that. But I've heard nothing but good things about that series. So that's why I'm interested. And I liked the first season of American Gods he did. So we'll see. Hopefully it's something good. Hopefully he has the presence of mind enough to take in the entire history and give it justice. So it'd be nice to see some, like, I think that's what would be interesting about the series is to flesh out a lot of these moments, like to take a season and really kind of delve into a lot of the characters and a lot of the other stuff in ways that, especially like with number three, you get these very surface characters. Be interesting to see him kind of give some more uh, um, meat to that. So whoever does it, it'll be interesting to see how they do that. So
We shall see.
yeah, we shall. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming back on. It's always great having you here. Let the people know where they can find you online and what you got coming up.
I can be found on Twitter. It's at Preston Fassel, and my name is in the episode description because it's not spelled like how it sounds.
Yeah.
I've got Beasts 42nd Street coming out through Cemetery Dance in March of 2023. As of this recording, it's available exclusively through Cemetery Dance. Will eventually be on Barnes & Noble and Amazon. And you can find my other books on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and wherever books are sold.
Awesome. All right. Well, thanks again, Preston. It's always good to have you on.
Always a pleasure to be here.
Thanks again to Preston for joining me. Next episode, Kat Velour returns to discuss Friday the 13th, Part 5, A New Beginning, and Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. Thanks for listening. If you liked what you heard, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app or at creepyandgeeky.com. You can follow the podcast on social media at Creepy and Geeky on both Twitter and Instagram. If you'd like to follow me, I'm Geek Thulu on Twitter and geek.thulu on Instagram. You can support the podcast by ordering teas and more from our TeePublic page. All of the links are in the show notes. Finally, don't forget, stay creepy.